Welcome to part 2 of our two-part English masterclass on macroeconomic foundations. In part 1, we built up gross domestic product from first principles, the definition, the price times quantity formula, a three-product worked example, the distinction between real and nominal GDP, the gap between GDP and GNP, and the difference between gross and net. Now in part 2 we go further. We will see why GDP is not just a number, but a diagnostic of the entire economy's health. We will distinguish economic growth from recession from slowdown, three states that look similar but mean very different things. We will use the famous car slowing analogy to explain why a positive but falling growth rate is not the same as negative growth. We will introduce GDP per capita and see why it is the right number for welfare comparisons. We will examine the deep connection between GDP and employment, the foundation of Okun's law. And we will close by surveying the three independent methods used to measure GDP. Let us begin. Section 1. The diagnostic power of GDP. Why does anyone care about GDP? Because it is the single best indicator of an economy's overall state. With one number, we can answer the most important question: is the economy expanding, contracting, or holding steady? If GDP rises this period compared to last period, the economy is expanding. More goods and services are being produced. Firms are hiring. Households are earning. Investment is happening. If GDP falls, the economy is contracting. Output is shrinking. Firms are laying off. Households are losing income. Investment freezes. If GDP holds steady, the economy is in pause, neither growing nor shrinking. These three states, expansion, contraction, and stagnation, are the basic states of any market economy. GDP is the dashboard that tells you which state you are in. Central banks watch GDP data the way pilots watch their altimeter. Policymakers calibrate interventions based on GDP trends. Investors price stocks based on GDP expectations. Every serious economic decision starts with reading the GDP signal. Section 2. Expansion, recession, and a critical refinement. Let us refine the basic states. When GDP is rising, we have economic expansion. When GDP is falling, we have economic contraction. When GDP falls for 2 consecutive quarters, that is the technical definition of a recession. Most economists use this definition. So a recession is not just any quarter where GDP fell. It must be 2 consecutive quarters of decline. This definition is convention, not theory. There is no deep economic reason it must be exactly 2 quarters. But the convention is widely accepted because it filters out one-off noise. A single bad quarter could be a hurricane, a tax change, a one-time disruption. 2 consecutive bad quarters indicates something systemic. Beyond recession, there are deeper states. A deep recession is sometimes called a depression, though the exact threshold is debated. The U.S. had one major depression, the 1930s. Most countries have had recessions, but few have had depressions. Recovery is the period immediately after a recession ends, when GDP begins growing again. And expansion is the longer phase where GDP continues to grow at a normal pace. The cycle of expansion, recession, recovery, expansion repeats throughout economic history. GDP data is what lets us identify which phase we are in. Section 3. Positive growth rate, but a problem. Here is a subtle point that confuses many students. Just because GDP is rising does not mean the economy is healthy. Look at this growth rate sequence. Year 1, GDP grew 15%. Year 2, grew 10%. Year 3, grew 7%. Year 4, grew 5%. Every single year, GDP is rising. Always positive growth. Yet something is clearly happening. Each year, the growth rate is lower than the previous year. The economy is still growing, but more slowly. What do we call this? It is not a recession. Recession requires negative growth. So what is it? Think of it like a car. You are driving at 100 kilometers per hour. You ease off the gas. You slow to 80, then 60, then 40. You are still moving forward. You are not reversing, but you are losing speed. The economy is doing the same thing. It is a slowdown, not a recession. The car analogy is useful because it captures the right intuition. Slowdowns can precede recessions if they continue. A car that keeps decelerating eventually reaches zero and then potentially reverses. But until growth turns negative, you are still expanding, just at a slower pace. The vocabulary matters. A slowdown is a warning signal. A recession is the actual disease. Section 4. Why this matters for policy. The distinction between expansion, slowdown, and recession is not just academic. It drives policy responses. During an expansion, central banks worry about inflation. They may raise interest rates to prevent overheating. During a slowdown, central banks worry about whether the slowdown will become a recession. They may cut rates preemptively. During a recession, central banks aggressively cut rates and may launch quantitative easing. Governments roll out stimulus packages. Unemployment insurance expands. The phase of the cycle determines which policy tools are appropriate. Reading GDP data wrongly can lead to wrong policy. Tightening into a slowdown could push it into recession. Loosening too late into a recession misses the window when stimulus is most effective. This is why GDP measurement is taken so seriously, not as a number on a page, but as a signal that drives trillion-dollar decisions. Section 5. GDP per capita, the welfare measure. So far we have been looking at total GDP, but total GDP can be misleading. Consider two countries. Country X has GDP of $1 trillion and population of 1 billion. Country Y has GDP of $1 trillion and population of 10 million. Their GDP is identical, but country Y is 100 times richer per person. GDP per capita is total GDP divided by population. It is the single best welfare indicator economists have. Compare countries by GDP per capita, and you get an immediate sense of how rich each economy actually is at the individual level. Norway, Switzerland, Luxembourg, the United States, Ireland, the top of the rankings. Most of sub-Saharan Africa, near the bottom. The rankings reflect not productive scale, but productivity per person. Now an important caveat. Real GDP per capita, measured at constant prices, is more useful than nominal GDP per capita, because the same nominal figure across countries with different inflation histories is hard to compare. And we should use purchasing power parity adjustments for international comparisons, but that is a topic for another time. The key point is, when comparing countries, when tracking welfare over time, when assessing whether an economy is genuinely improving, use real GDP per capita, not raw GDP. Section 6. GDP and employment. Okun's law. There is a tight relationship between GDP growth and unemployment. When GDP expands, firms hire more workers. When GDP contracts, firms lay off. The relationship is not perfect. There are lags and frictions, but the correlation is strong. Arthur Okun, in 1962, estimated this relationship empirically. He found that in the U.S., a 1% fall in unemployment was associated with roughly 2 to 3% growth in GDP. Equivalently, for every percentage point that GDP growth exceeded the long-run potential growth rate, unemployment fell by about 1/3 to 1/2 percentage point. This empirical regularity is known as Okun's law. It is not really a law of nature. It is an observation that has roughly held over time, but it captures a deep truth. Output and employment move together. Economic expansion creates jobs. Economic contraction destroys them. This is why central banks have a dual mandate in the United States: price stability and full employment. They cannot pursue either one without considering the other. Inflation control through GDP slowdown causes unemployment. Employment maintenance through stimulus risks inflation. The trade-off comes from Okun's law and the related Phillips curve. Both relationships have GDP at their core. Section 7. Measuring GDP, 3 methods. We have been talking about GDP as if it were a single number that can be looked up. In practice, calculating GDP is a massive statistical undertaking. National statistical agencies, the Bureau of Economic Analysis in the U.S., the Central Bureau of Statistics in Israel, and equivalents elsewhere, use 3 independent methods to measure it. The first method is the expenditure approach. Track all spending on final goods and services. Add up C plus I plus G plus net exports. Every dollar produced is bought by someone, so the spending side gives total output. The second method is the income approach. Track all income generated in production, wages, profits, rents, interest. Every dollar of value created becomes someone's income. The third method is the production approach. Track value added at every stage of the supply chain. The combined harvester produces wheat worth $1. The mill turns it into flour worth $1.50, adding 50 cents of value. The bakery turns it into bread worth $3, adding $1.50 more. Some value added at every stage of the supply chain. All three methods, applied correctly, should give the same number. In practice, they give slightly different numbers due to measurement errors. The official GDP figure is usually a reconciled estimate that draws on all three. Section 8. The reality of measurement. GDP measurement is hard. Some categories are easy: sales receipts, payroll records, government spending reports. These are well recorded. Other categories are harder. Underground economy activity is by definition unreported. Informal economy production may not flow through formal markets. Non-market production, like household labor, volunteer work, is excluded entirely. Imputed values, like the rental equivalent of owner-occupied housing, must be estimated. Each of these introduces some uncertainty in the final GDP number. Different countries measure these things differently, which makes international comparisons harder than they look. Revisions are common. The initial estimate of a quarter's GDP is often revised significantly when more data arrives. Annual revisions can change GDP by 0.5% or more. Each revision can change the policy story. A revised positive number can flip a slowdown narrative to expansion. A revised negative number can confirm a recession. The point is, GDP numbers are not facts in the sense that physics has facts. They are statistical estimates that come with measurement uncertainty. Treat them seriously, but with appropriate skepticism. Conclusion. Across these two parts, we have built up GDP from first principles. Part 1. The definition, the formula, the worked example, real versus nominal, GDP versus GNP, gross versus net. Part 2. GDP as economic diagnostic, expansion, recession, slowdown. The car analogy, GDP per capita, Okun's law connecting output to employment, three measurement methods, and the realities of measurement. Together, this is the foundation of macroeconomic analysis. Every other concept in macro, inflation, interest rates, unemployment, fiscal policy, trade, builds on GDP. Without the framework we have built, the rest of macroeconomics is impossible to understand clearly. If you found this two-part masterclass useful, please share it with someone who would benefit. And subscribe to Macroeconomics with Michael for more deep dives into the foundational ideas of macroeconomic theory. Thank you for watching.